Hi. Welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today I spoke with Scott M. Hoffman, the author of Inside. We all like to think we could be somebody different. When you talk about the mob, the Mafia, the Chicago outfit, the New York families, depending on who you are, depends on where your mind travels with that information. But they are real people. And as the book implies, some people have seen inside of what happens with the Chicago outfit. And Scott is going to tell you a story. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. And we're going to get into something that is probably one of the most popular topics in the world, with myth, legend, and some fiction and reality, and probably largely dosed up by Hollywood. So could you just explain to everybody who you are and the book that you wrote?
Well, nice to see you, David, and also your audience. My name is Scott M. Hoffman, and I'm living in Chicago. My father was high-ranking in the Chicago crime family, the Outfit. He was a manager for Paul Ricca. He was a consigliere for Sam Giancana. He reported to Tony Accardo, who would be considered the CEO. And in 1973, he reported to Joe Iappa as a consigliere. My father had the plans for the 7 hotels and 7 casinos in Las Vegas. And when I was 8 years old, I was starting to go with my father to Las Vegas at least 5 times a year. Because my father's approach was not grooming me. That was, hosts will ask me, well, was he grooming you? No. What he was doing was saying to me, I want you to see everything so you will know with your eyes open if this is what you really want to do. But you've got to see everything to know what you want to do. So normally there's a mob law, let's say, mob rule, that cops and kids are off limits, okay? So, and not women. It has nothing to do with women, just cops and kids. So normally you would say, geez, 8 years old, what was he doing all this? Well, the Outfit at their height was bringing in all their illegal activities, $200 million a year. And Las Vegas was bringing in $100 million a year. So since the first conversation of the day is about money, the last conversation of the day is about money, no, they didn't care about me, okay? They didn't care about me at all. So yeah, I could see whatever I want, and I saw a lot. I saw every bit of mob life, okay? And the Outfit is still continuing today. They have 4 street crews. In fact, in 2022, they signed let's say, an agreement, not on paper, but a partnership between the Philadelphia mob, them, and the Kansas City mob. And I knew quite a bit of what was going to be going on in the Super Bowl, but I can't talk about that. Okay? Yeah.
It's interesting because obviously I have a podcast, and when I talk to friends, I'll be honest, most of my friends don't show a huge amount of interest in what I'm doing from the day to day or week to week of a podcast. But I still mention a guest that I might have on and what I'm doing. But when I mentioned you and your book and the story, everybody was interested. Everybody was like,
Subject matter, yeah.
yeah.
It's a
There is.
subject matter that everyone wants to know. Like I always say, I'm the messenger, but it's a subject. I have not had a host yet tell me, Scott, this was a waste of time. I don't know why I did this with you. I'm sorry to take up your time, but really it was garbage. No one has said that. Everyone wants me to come back and spend more time with them.
But it's. I mean, you've covered it in some of the questions that I've read. That people have a funny fascination. It's almost. I mean, I'll give you an example of what I mean. When I said to one of my friends, Emma, that I was talking to you, and her and I normally go to the cinema together and watch films. And she was just like, we should do a Mafia day and watch Mafia films for the day instead of going to the cinema. So we ended up watching Casino, then Goodfellas, and then The Irishman, all based off the fact that I would be talking to you. And she was just like, we should have a Mafia day. This would be great. And it's that. I don't get that about any other subject.
No, you won't, because as I tell people and I tell the hosts on other podcasts and radio shows, no one lives this type of a life unless you're in the life. You have to know it from the inside. People have their normal lives. I did not have a child's life, okay? I did not have birthday parties. I didn't learn how to ride a bike. My father never took me to a professional baseball game like the Chicago Cubs. I was a Cubs fan. We never tossed a football around. Everything was mob related. You're going to see everything. You're going to learn everything was mob related. So when I am in a restaurant eating and I see a family, say with young children, I look at them and I say, I wonder what it was like to have a childhood, because I didn't never had a life of innocence. My life of innocence started and ended and began in Las Vegas when I was 8 years old. But I had seen mob activity before that. Okay, I had seen it before, and that was in a church.
What? Yeah, because there's a big section in the book about the church and how they get the priest on side. It's you. There was something I've written it down, and I'm trying to find how I because it was something you described. But it's once they get hold of something, because it's interesting. They do the same with the funeral directors with the funeral house,
Oh yeah.
and I was wondering what is the difference because there's this so-called rule, and I want to get into the rules at some point, because there's this some so-called rule that you don't touch civilians, you leave civilians alone because they're not part of the life. But actually, they've always kind of get civilians into the life. You know, like the funeral director, the priest. I mean, it turns out on every occasion these people cannot say no; they're not allowed to.
Well, but basically, the reason is because in the Catholic faith, you are allowed absolution if the priest will give it to you. You can be absolved of all crimes. I'll never forget, I was in a neighborhood hospital, and today in Chicago, like everywhere else, the hospital system has all these conglomerates that run the hospital. And it was a Saturday, and this guy was getting near the end of his life. The priest was going to come and give him last rites, but he was also, and his wife was there, and his daughter was there, and I'm there in the hospital because I'd known him a long time. And he says to the priest, I'd like absolution on a guy. And the priest says, okay, well, what happened? And he said, I murdered this son of a bitch, and if I could dig him up again, I'd murder him again. So I want absolution. So the priest looks at me and says, let's like go outside, gives me the eye, let's go outside and talk. And he said to me, what do I do now with Johnny? And I said, well, tell Johnny this, that you don't accept coupons. It's only 1 for 1. You can only give him absolution on one time. You can't give him absolution on a second time. And he goes back in, he tells Johnny. Johnny says, are you serious? You mean you can't give me another absolution if I killed a guy twice? And the priest said, no, I really, it's only one time. And Johnny looked at me, he says, Scott, maybe I should have become Jewish. I made a mistake. I should have left the Catholic faith. So, yeah, I mean, that was what it was all about. Like I say, the very first thing I saw, this was before Las Vegas. This was at least 2 months before, when people say, oh, Las Vegas, was that how you started? No, it really wasn't. 2 months before, there were two wise guys, one named Tony and his brother Mikey, and they invited my father. They said, bring Scott along. And there was a dinner and raffle at a Catholic church on Taylor Street, which is on the west side of Chicago, a heavy Italian neighborhood. A lot of wise guys lived in the neighborhood. So we get there Saturday, and Tony and Mikey are outside, and we say hello, and the priest comes out. And Tony says to the priest, can you please, Father, bless my ticket for tonight? Because I need some good luck and I need God's help. So Tony takes out the ticket. The priest says, sure. And he looks at the ticket and, okay, puts the blessing on it. And then we go inside and we have dinner, the dinner and everything. And after dinner, the priest comes out with this container and like a handle with the assistant priest. And that was all ping pong balls with numbers, because they would start out a $5 winner if your number was drawn, a $10, and they would build up to $50, which was a lot of money in those days, because we're talking 1956, and that was, a lot of money. So they get to the final prize, okay, where they're going to award the $50. And the priest says to the assistant priest and to the audience, I'm going to take just a little bit of break because my hand's a little bit tired. And I know God is watching me and wants me to to do the right thing, and I know God will do something to me, and I don't want to leave this parish. And everyone starts laughing. So the priest takes the container, and they go away. They come back maybe 5 minutes later. He said, "Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have the final drawing." And the assistant priest cranks up the handle, and the balls start flying around. And the priest puts his hand up, and he looks to God upstairs like he's talking to God. Say, "God, yes, I know you've got your eyes on me, and you see when someone does good and someone does bad, and I will always do good for you." So then he pulls out the number. Now, Mikey and Tony's number was 6. I just want you to remember the number 6, okay? The priest puts his hand in, and he pulls out a ping pong ball, number 6, okay? And this is what so it's over at that point, and everyone's saying, "Oh, congratulations." And I'm sitting with my father, and I told him I have to go to the bathroom. I'm going in the back. And I see Tony and Mikey, who have $20 apiece. They don't see me, and they take the $10 and they give it to the priest, and they said, "Thanks, priest. Thanks." Whatever his name was, Frankie or Johnny, whatever his name was, the priest, thanks. So now I'm go to the bathroom. I'm trying to figure this out. I'm 8 years old. What's going on here? I come back. My father says, "I'll tell you in the car." So we say our goodbyes maybe a half hour later. We thank him for the dinner. It was nice to see you win and all that. Get in the car. My father said that was the cold ball trick. And he explained to me what it was when the priest looked at the card to put his blessing, he saw the number. So what he did was he went back and he took out number 6 and put it in the freezer and let it sit there during all the other drawings, took the container with the handle, and then he puts it in, mixes it with all the other balls. So now when the assistant priest cranks up the container and the balls are jumping around, and then it stops and he puts his hand in, he's feeling for the cold ball. Okay. Once he felt the cold ball, then he pulled it out, number 6. Okay. So that was the cold ball trick. And I had seen that. And after that, I would see that later on where guys could win $500, $1,000. I saw a guy win $10,000, but they were all mob guys, all wise guys. So the priest was involved in drawing the cold ball. And every time I'd see a raffle now, even in later years, I'd always say to myself, are they using the cold ball trick? And the people didn't know.
No, because there's lots of little tricks. But would there ever have been a time when a priest would have said no?
Yes, there was one time when, and I was with her. I was with Annie Spilatra, Michael Spilatra's wife. And this was after they found the boys, buried in the Indiana cornfield because they had been killed before. They didn't die in the cornfield; they had died before. They found the bodies 2 years later. And I went with Annie to the church, and she wanted a Catholic funeral at the church. And every Sunday, when the kids were little, they taken them to the church, and they donated money to the church. And normally, you figure, okay, it would have been a done deal. But the priest was, I would say, early 40s, mid 40s, a young guy. I can't do it. I'm not going to do it because of what they did during their life. Mm. Okay. And Annie's arguing with him. She says, "Look, we come every Sunday. We bring the kids. We donate money." No, he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. And that was very rare that something like that happened. I guess we hit a priest who had morals,
Yeah.
Because a lot of them didn't. A lot of them didn't. Like I say, my father used to use churches, and he used Catholic cemeteries and Jewish synagogues. And the priest, he'd have meet with guys there. He'd talk with guys because he never trusted a restaurant. He was always afraid there was a bug under the table. So when we would be through with the priest and using the church, my father would always give him, here's a $5 donation. And if the priest was a drinker, then he would have Jack Daniels, give him a bottle of Jack Daniels, Cuddy Sark, Johnny Walker Red. And we had 5 churches downstairs in the basement. And no one could go downstairs other than the priest that had freezers, the long freezers, not the tall type, the long type. And what they were used for is when guys were killed, they would bring the body to the freezer in a body bag, put it in, and the next morning they had a key to the back door, and guys would take the body bag out of freezer. So it was a storage area. Okay, so they were storing the body in a church, in the basement of the church. So, yeah, when people tell me about religion, I'm saying, oh, I'm glad you're faithful and you like religion. And I'm thinking, if you only knew, you knew
Mm.
what really was going on. There's more to this later on, more to this.
But it is interesting, isn't it? Because there is this idea that we like to think that people can't say no to the mob, but more often than not, from what I see and from what I read and from research you kind of do, I don't think I don't think anyone tested or many people tested in terms of priests and stuff like that saying no, because they all seem to actually quite like the idea of being part of it.
Well, you have to remember, especially in the case of the priest, unlike, say, a Jewish rabbi who signs a contract with the temple, the priests don't sign any contract. They have to rely on the collection plate on Sunday. And that's a whole other story because I know exactly what Cardinal John Cody in the 70s, at that time, Chicago had the second largest uh, Catholic archdiocese. And I knew what he was doing with the money. I knew how the criminal investigation started. I knew how he met Helen Doolin Wilson, how he opened up accounts for her. Oh, yeah, I know that all about that. I know why the grand jury, I know what the grand jury indicted him. And you see, unless the grand jury indictment is opened, it's remains sealed. And his was never opened. He died April 25th, 1982. That's my mother's birthday. So I remember that, but it was never, ever open. So, yeah, the reason being is this. My father told me pretty much early on, he said, Scotto, always remember, he always called me Scotto. When it was me and him, it was always Scotto. When I would be, say, with you or anybody else, it was Scott. He'd always call me Scott. He'd say, Scotto, listen, in the life you're going to see that money and fear will manipulate people. Always remember that. Money and fear will manipulate people. And when I go out and do my in-person presentations, David, I can't tell you how many women come up to me and are very, very interested. Well, this sounds great. I'm really interested in all this stuff. And they ask me, more questions and what went on. And I'm thinking to myself, you're interested from an outsider's look, but you wouldn't want to be involved in what goes on because of what happens when guys would go away. The kids would always be told, your dad's going to college. He's going away to
Yeah,
college. Now, David, you're an intelligent man. It doesn't take 15 years to get your bachelor's degree in college, okay?
yeah, yeah,
The other thing they would be told is your father has an out-of-town job. I'm sure you have friends that have out-of-town jobs, but they're not away for 15 years from the house, okay? But they never wanted their kids to know what was going on. And you have to remember, uh, wise guys, for the most part, my father was different, but wise guys, for the most part, never talk at home what they're doing. So the kids have no idea until much later on in their life, because they'd ask me, is my father in the mafia? Is my father in the mafia? My father would always tell me, Scotto, when they ask you this, just say, talk to your father, talk to your uncle. Never say anything about anybody. There's a mob saying it with the outfit. If it's your business and not my business, it's none of my business.
yeah.
Okay. And that was really the truth. That was almost like the English version of Omerta, Code of Silence. And so, but I get this from kids. Is my dad in the mafia? Is my uncle in the mafia? And I'd say, well, talk to them. I can't tell you. I don't know. I knew they were, sure, but I'm not telling them. So, yeah, it was, like I say, a lot of things happened that way. And the
What?
mob speak was the hardest thing for me in the beginning. Okay. For most people in a movie, and maybe you've seen the movie, they'll say, oh, guy, whack him. He gets whacked, which is a way of being killed. But there's another saying. When the order is given, I can't remember how many times I hear Paul Ricca or Sam Giancana, because I'd be with my father, give him his receipt. So,
Yeah,
David, if you're in a store and the clerk says to you, Mr. Watson, would you like your receipt? Make sure those comfortable sneakers are tied up tight and run for that door. That means kill him. That means take his life. That's what
yeah.
it's about. When a guy got shot, 3 in the back of the head, in the back of the head. Okay, so yeah, it was that was hard because you got to remember I have to go back and assimilate myself with kids in the neighborhood. I had to go back and be a kid like them, try and fit in. I'm leading 2 different lives.
It's interesting because you mentioned that in the book about your dad would take you on visits to widows, knowing who
Yeah,
killed them, and you'd have to, and you actually talk about how in the book, you talk about Bobby, um, how he gets really good at pretending he's upset at wakes, at funerals, talking to the
Yeah,
widows, knowing
yeah.
when he knew who killed them, and in some cases had seen them get killed.
And he set up the kills. He set up the hits. He'd be
Mm.
told, set it up, set it up. We have to remember, see, in the life, okay, there was only one free day. So if you can remember when you were a child with your family, celebrating Thanksgiving, right? Celebrating Christmas. On those days at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd be out with my father collecting money, juice money, which is loan sharking money and gambling money. And Christmas Day, he'd always say, "We'll wait till 1 o'clock so the kids can open up their gifts and then we'll go out." Normally, we'd start out way on the south side or southern suburbs. I mean, we started at 1, I might not get home till 9 o'clock. And these guys knew my father was coming. So I never had a Thanksgiving or Christmas. I'm out collecting money. But the only free day was Mother's Day. Mother's Day was the only free day. Everyone goes to see mom. So no one got beat up, no one got killed, nothing bad happened until Monday morning, 12:01 a.m. That's when things happen. That's when it happens. I remember I was out with a guy where I was 11 years old and it was 12:10 a.m. And the wise guy says, "Scott, what time you got on your wristwatch?" And I said, "Okay." He says, "Because I don't know if my watch is working right. Let's go get the guy." And he goes to the guy's house and the guy says, "Are you sure you got the right time? Maybe your time is off." He said, "No, it's not off. I'm here for the money. You have the money or else you're going to get beat." The guy got beat. He got beat. So yeah, a Mother's Day was the only free day. My father during the week would get candy, and then on Sunday, Mother's Day, we'd go 6 a.m. in the morning to a floral shop and start buying the flowers. And then at that point, later in the morning, maybe 11, we start going to the houses of either wives who had their husbands who were away in a federal facility or mothers whose sons were in a federal facility. And my father would bring them candy and flowers for that day.
Because that's something that's slightly different, and you do talk about how films get some of it wrong, and some of the things that happen in real life. In the films, they talk about if somebody gets killed, or if somebody goes inside, you stay away from the wives, you leave them alone, especially if somebody's
Yeah,
in prison. But there's bits in the book where you talk about how your dad goes to visit people and check in on them, and like when somebody
yeah,
and when one particular wife had her husband killed, your dad went round with you, and you were actually he was checking that she, like, is there any money? No. Well, you probably need to sell the house, and he actually leaves her some money, and he does some things, and but
yeah.
he also warns her not to date anybody in the mob or the outfit.
That's correct. That's correct. See what it was? My father was very handy. He could do electrical work. He can do carpentry. He could do plumbing, though he didn't like plumbing. He could reupholster furniture. He could work on cars. And he'd always, after someone's husband went away, was sentenced, okay, was going away, he'd always tell the wife, "If you have a problem with the doorbell, call me. If you have a problem with the sink, it's leaking, call me." He said, "If you have a problem with the roof, I'll get a roofer. I know a couple of roofers." My father always took this approach that it's not the wife or the kid's fault and they shouldn't suffer. Okay, they shouldn't suffer. Because you have to remember one thing the movies get wrong, they'll say, "Oh, this guy's being taken care of." No. The only thing is once a guy went away, if he had a territory, they wanted his territory. They didn't care about the guy at all. It didn't matter what happened. Like I talk about in my book, a woman goes to see a guy, a boss, and he tells her, he says, "Use your moneymaker." And what that meant was go on the street and prostitute yourself. That's what he's telling her. And her husband was part of his street crew. And he wasn't, that's all he would tell her. Use your moneymaker, which means use your body on the street, prostitute yourself for whatever money you could get, $5, $10, because that's all the pavement princesses get on the street.
Mm.
Okay. It's maybe $5, $10, and they use it for drugs. So no, they weren't interested at all about them. My father was. Sometimes him and my mother would take the wife out for dinner, go to a movie. Okay. Because my father would always say, it's not their fault. But he'd always say to me, Scott, when you get involved with the life, this is what's going to happen. I tell you how many times uh, bosses would say to me, Scott, I'd like you to go out with my daughter. Or an uncle would say, Scott, go out with my niece. Well, I got to remember these little Madonnas by the age of 16 had the Corvette. And this is what really happens. Say they would say someone like David Watson, they meet him and he's a nice guy. And they say, oh, David, come on, let's go downstairs in the basement. I just want to talk to you. And he'd say to you, a wise guy would say to you, David, how much money do you earn? And you tell him, what you earn on your job. And the wise guy would say, David, my daughter's used to a better life. How about you come with me? I can pay you more money. Okay. And that some guys would fall for that and they would go into the life. Okay. They got started that way because they couldn't refuse what the father was saying. And the father basically was saying, you can't take care of my daughter. I don't want my daughter looking. In other words, I don't want my daughter driving a Chevy or Ford. I want her driving a sports Mustang or a car like, that type of deal. So I wasn't going to go through that. They'd want to take me down to the basement. I said, no, I have to go to the bathroom. I'll be back. I wouldn't do it. So I didn't date any of these girls. But yeah, a lot of their guys, they wanted me to go out with them. And they said, you're a nice guy. They'll have a good life. I said, well, I don't know how much of a father I could be from prison, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So no, I stayed away.
How did your dad get into it?
Well, what happened was this. When I was a senior in high school, I first told my mother that it was my last semester, and I was 17, not 18 yet, be in a few months. And I told my mother that I got an application for Wilbur Wright Junior College. And in those days, the junior colleges in Chicago, the tuition was free. You had to pay for books, but the tuition was free. And I said to her, Mom, I'm not interested in going into the life full time. Okay. I don't want to be a participant. I'll be an observer, which I was, but I don't want to be a participant. And people say, well, what's the difference? I said, when you're participating, that's when you can get arrested, you get charged because you're doing something, you're part of something. When you're looking at something, they need evidence. So what kind of evidence can they get from someone who's just watching, but not participating in drug dealing, in chop shops, okay, any other mob activity, loan sharking, gambling, money laundering, extortion. I knew how to forge documents. I wasn't good at safe cracking. They tried to teach me that I could never do. But yeah, I was good. So, she says to me, Scott, look, just tell him. That's the easiest. Just tell him. So my father came home and he worked regular jobs, okay, to get a W-2. So he'd have legit money, okay? Because the IRS criminal division is always investigating these guys. Where are you getting the money? Okay, for example, Tony Accardo's house in River Forest was 24,000 square feet. That's a big house. I think you would agree with me. That's kind of a big house. 6 bedrooms, 6 beds. But on a beer salesman salary that he would say he worked for Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer as a beer salesman. Now, how can a beer salesman pay the taxes on a 24,000 square foot house? If you know, please let me know. Okay. So my father comes home and I said, Dad, I want to talk to you. We go in the living room of the apartment because we always lived in 1-bedroom apartments, my sister and myself, my mother and father. And I said, look, I decided that I'm going to go to Wright Junior College. I'm not sure what I really want to study, so that's why I'm going to a junior college and take some courses and see what I would really like to do with my life. And he turned to me and says, look, Scotto, this is it. The worst thing a parent can do is to force a child into something they don't want to do, because 30 years later, they're going to come back to you and say, you forced me into this. You forced me to be an accountant or to be a salesman. You forced me. Because obviously at a teenage age, they don't have the life experiences that I might have or you might have as an older person. They'll maybe listen to their fathers or mothers. So he said to me, if you want to further your education, you want to go into the business world in some capacity, I'm with you 150%. I'm backing you 150%. Go ahead and make that dream possible and graduate from college. And that's how he was. And I told him I didn't want to be a participant. I would be an observer. And I was. Things continued, okay, after I graduated college. It wasn't like, no, I cut everything off. But I didn't have dealings with these guys in a participating manner. So he accepted it and, went from there. And I went on to college. I, got a scholarship to Long Island University in Brooklyn. I had to come up with the room and board as they were paying for tuition. And so I started working mob social clubs, Colombo, Lucchese, Bonanno. And Lucchese, I worked at a place called The Suite. It was a hotel. It was owned by Henry Hill. So that's how I got to know the real Goodfellas. I got to know the real Sopranos and other mob families, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Rochester, New York, Buffalo, who was called the Arm, Boston, Providence, or Providence, Boston. That family, they're known as the Company. And they're still active today, as is Buffalo still active. So yeah, when people tell me about movies, yeah, I knew these people. The Irishman, what a character he was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Henry Hill is probably he's obviously synonymous because of the Goodfellas, and he's probably one of the most famous due to the films, sort of mob people out there. And he was half Italian, wasn't he? Half Irish, half Italian.
Yeah, he was Irish. He could never be made.
Yeah.
See, because you have to be 100% on both sides, and he wasn't 100%.
Yeah, I could say, 'cause
His
wasn't his
father was
mum
Irish.
was, yeah, his mum was, I thought his mum was Italian, but that might just be from
Yeah,
the
but
film.
it didn't matter because it
No.
wasn't 100% Italian on both sides. So the Irish side was what defeated any purpose because he'd tell me, he says, I can't be made like your father can't be made. I says, yeah, I know, because you're not Italian on both sides. You got to be Italian on both sides.
But
So
how did your
he was,
dad get into it? How did your dad become part of the outfit?
well, what happened was my father, when he was 2 years old and his brother was 6 months old, he was born, they lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the father died. So the mother had relatives in Chicago on Taylor Street, Taylor and Ogden, that owned a three-story apartment building. And that's how they came, because there was an opening on the third floor. Now, normally, in those days, and even when I was a kid, if you lived on the third floor of a three-flat building or three-story building, the rent would be a little bit cheaper because these were high-story buildings. So the rent would be a little cheaper. So, yeah, my father they moved to Chicago. And he was a good student. He was a very good student. In fact, his senior year in high school, he met the assistant principal because my father worked in the cafeteria to get a free lunch. And that's how they really met. And the assistant principal said to my father, well, what do you want to do? And, he said, would you like to go to college? I looked up your record. It's very good. And my father says, yeah. He says, well, what would you like to do? And my father at that point told me he wanted to be a surgeon. That's what he really wanted to do. He wanted to be a medical doctor. So the assistant principal said, let me see, I got a couple of friends. Let me see what I can do. And a couple of months later, he comes back and he tells my father, a friend of his guy he knows is in the admissions office for the University of Chicago. And the guy's heard the story and he saw my father's grades. Assistant principal gave him the grades. And he says he's willing to give you a full scholarship. You could be a pre-med major. My father was very excited. He goes home. He tells my grandmother, I got a scholarship to go to the University of Chicago, be a pre-med major. She says, very nice, go to work. So the reason he called Sam Giancana was this. When he was in his teens, my father was a member of a Jewish community center on the swimming team. And Sam Giancana in his 42s, that was his street gang. Okay? And they used to hang out at a restaurant called the 42nd Cafe, based, I think, on 42nd Street, New York. And they were always with him. And he told my father, it's going to cost you, I think it was either 2 or 3 pennies to cross Taylor Street to go to this community center. My father says, I'm not giving you 2 or 3 pennies because that was still a lot of money. And Sam Giancana says, well, you're not going across the street. And Sam Giancana pulls out a small knife and he sticks it in my father's hand. And my father goes home and uses some, I guess, rubbing alcohol. That was it. It wasn't like today where everyone's running to the emergency room, scratch or something. And next day he's going to swim practice, the same thing. Sam Giancana's, saying, 2 or 3 pennies to cross Taylor Street. And my father said, okay, I'll give you something. And he punched Sam Giancana and knocked him down. And the 42s start moving at my father. And some of those 42s never liked my father after that. And Sam Giancana says, wait a minute. He gets up. I guess his lip was bleeding just a little bit, nothing major. He says, why do you want to go across the street to this community center? Because he didn't know at that point. And my father told him I'm on the swim team. And he says, can you teach me how to swim? Because Sam Giancana didn't know how to swim. And he says, yes, I can, except we're going to have to change your name. It's going to have to be Sam Rosenberg. You can't be Giancana and go across the street. You got to be Sam Rosenberg. So he went and across the street, and my father would try and teach him to swim. And I say try, because years later, maybe 20 years later, I asked my father, did he ever learn to swim? Because whenever I'd see him, he'd always float on his back. I never saw him do the freestyle or the butterfly or, any of the swimming strokes. It was just floating. And my father said, I'll tell you, Scotto, he was so tense in the water that the only thing I could do is teach him to float on his back, because I really had the feeling he was trying to kill the waves, but he didn't have a gun to do it. So he fought it all the time. And it's true. He always fought it, because people would ask me, what was Sam Giancana like? And I'd always tell them it was a violent mind and a violent body. Okay, so that's how he got to know him. And when he couldn't go to college, at that point, he needed a job. And Sam Giancana says, do you know how to drive a beer truck? My father said, yes. I don't know if he really did or he didn't. He said, because I'll ride shotgun with a shotgun too. We have to make runs up to Milwaukee or Al Capone, who my father called Big Al. He says, okay. And that's how it started. They developed really a friendship there, because after Al Capone was convicted of the tax charge, and I always tell people, if you want to use a good trivia question to catch people and say, well, who got convicted with Al Capone? It was Frank Nitti, or as my father called him, Frank Nutty Nitti. But Sam Giancana was a protege of Paul Ricca, and he started to talk with Paul Ricca about my father. And he's interested, and he said, look, my father was young, early 20s maybe at that point. He said, I want you to manage the Black Hands. And my father played cards with the Black Hands. The Black Hands, Al Capone was actually a Black Hand, came from Brooklyn. And everyone was fearful of the Black Hands, because this is how they were all extortionists, but they were very violent. Yeah. But since they were born in Sicily and came to America, they would not accept anybody in the mob who was not Sicilian. And if you were from Northern Italy, they would accept you, but you could never be a leadership in any leadership position. Never. They would accept you from Northern Italy, but no, it was all Sicilians. And what they would do is they'd go to a building and, say an office, a grocery store, and they tell the people, the neighborhoods, there's some problems here. You need protection. We're trying to help you. And of course, the owner of the grocery store, the restaurant would say, get out of here, get out of here. And that night, the Black Hands would put a picture of a black hand on the door, which meant they're coming after you. And the next day, the same thing. You need protection in the neighborhood. It's changing. Different people are coming in. The owner would throw them out. And that night, the windows were broken. They worked in phases. My father always said it's phases. Phase one was break the windows, go back. No, I'm not going to give you money. Phase two was burn the building down. They would torch the building. Okay, grocery store get torched. Guys, really upset. They go back for phase three, and they say, well, when you get it rebuilt, you see what we said, this neighborhood's got a lot of problems. And if the guy was, at that point, wasn't really reneging, he was kind of agreeing. And one guy would say to him, look, if you don't give us the money, the next thing we go after is you. And the guy says, how much do you want? That would be it. So the Black Hands everyone was very much afraid of the Black Hands. It was always a big problem. And, I know a lot of stuff about a lot of people. And one of the things is Mayor Anton Cermak, who was with Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932 when he was running for president. And they were in Miami for a speaking engagement. And Cermak stood up and got shot. And history will always say he took a bullet for FDR. No, that was not the case. I'll tell you it wasn't the case. Because what happened was when he became mayor, he said, I'm getting rid of these Black Hands. I'm getting rid of all these mobsters. I'm going to clean up the first ward in Chicago, which was mob run. And the Black Hands didn't want to hear it at all. It was the Black Hands who killed him that day. He wasn't taking no bullet for anybody. He got killed that day because he vowed to voters, I'm going to get rid of the mob. I'm going to get rid of the mob. Well, the outfit has been around for 120 years. Okay. So you tell me, has anyone gotten rid of them? So like I said, a lot of things about a lot of people, believe me.
One of the things that fascinates me with the stories and everything, and it's just, it's also quite disturbing in a way, And it's not just the violence. It's not just the violence. And I say this as somebody who's glued to Mafia stuff. I'm as intrigued as every other person. But you could literally be running a crew, running a street with somebody for 10, 20, 30 years, your best friend. And if he gets an order to hit you, he's going to do it. And there's no evidence that I see of any loyalty. And they turn on you like you can turn on a tap or turn on a light.
Yeah, my father would always say it's like turning on a switch in a room when turning the light on. He'd always tell me right from the beginning when I was 8 years old, because we talk about personalities. My father always, we spent a lot of time on a lot of things, but he would always talk about personalities, not only mob personalities, but personalities you're going to meet in the world. The guy who's your friend and he knifes you in the back, the guy who runs to the boss with your idea how to make something better, the moody guy. But my father was one personality you always got to watch, and that's the quiet guy, because you don't know what the quiet guy is thinking. All these other guys, they're running their mouth, you know. But the thing with that is, in the beginning, he said to me, always remember, Scott, you have no friends here. Remember that. You have no friends. They're not your friends, because the loyalty is always to mob family. And I'll give you an example. In the movie, The Irishman, I knew Russell Buffalino. Okay, I knew Buffalino. I knew Raymond Patriarca Sr. Both those guys were close with Frank Sinatra, but that's not what you're asking, so we'll put that story on the side. And Buffalino, I think it might have been his second child, maybe. The wife's bag breaks. Now, as men, we don't know what pregnancy's like, but we know this, that if the bag breaks, she has to go to the hospital right away. It's not like tomorrow morning we can do it. Okay? So his Buffalino's wife tells him this. And Buffalino was in charge of Scranton, Pennsylvania, Scranton, and Erie. That was his area. But he was heavy. He was very heavy into the La Cosa Nostra. He was high ranking in that sense. And you know what he tells her? I got to go to a meeting. Find your own way to get there. He walks out of the house. Okay. Now her bag is. So she goes across to a neighbor, and the guy was very nice. I guess he was very nice. He said, "Oh no, we got to go to the hospital right away." And the guy's wife said, "Yeah, come on, let's go." And she says, "Well, I don't have anything packed." She says, "Don't worry about it. Give me your key, and I'll come later. I'll come back. We'll pack something for you. But you got to get to the hospital." Okay. And they were the ones who took her to the hospital. So was there any loyalty by Buffalino to his wife? No, the loyalty was he had to go to a meeting, and we come first. And when guys are made, they're always told our family comes first. If we want you 3 a.m, you got to show up 3 a.m. If your kid's having a birthday party or something, school activity, you got to be there. When I graduated from grammar school, no one from my family was there. When I graduated high school, I didn't have anybody there. When I was graduated from New York, okay, that was a distance. Nobody was there. But it was very difficult to see the moms and dads hugging their kids or taking pictures. We're going to go to a restaurant. No, I didn't have that. All I did was walk home and be by myself. No, I didn't have anybody there. Okay, that's how it was. So yeah, he'd always, it was funny. You bring this up. In 1998, I'm in West Hollywood, California. I'm invited to a party there, and 3 guys come out of a car, and they're all actors, because I recognized one of them right away was Ray Liotta, who in the movie played Henry Hill. So he was, he comes in and people, I say, "Oh, it's Ray Liotta. They're all excited. And I'm off to the side and I figure I got to see, I want to talk to him, but I'll wait. See if he goes in the, the backyard. And he was a heavy smoker. He had a gold pack compartment type thing, and he took the cigarette out. He's back there in the yard. He's by himself and he's smoking. And I go out there and say, "Oh, Mr. Liotta, I really enjoy your work. You're a great actor. But can I ask you something? Is it okay?" He says, "Sure, go right ahead." He was very nice. And I said, "Well, what do you think about Henry?" And he says, "Henry who?" And I said, well, in that movie, Good Guys or Good Something, this guy, Henry. He said, "You mean Henry Hill?" And I said, yeah, that's the guy. He said, "Every second I was with him, I was scared." And I'm thinking, here's Ray Liotta, he plays all these tough guys in the movie and everything. And he says to me, "How do you know Henry?" I said, it was just kind of passing. I'm not telling him how I know Henry. Okay. I just said it was a guy passing. But I said, I said, I looked at the publicity photos, from the movie of you and Henry, and you're both smiling. And he said to me, I'll tell you, he said, I smiled under duress. I was afraid if I didn't smile, Henry was going to do something. So yeah, that's why it looks, we're both friendly, we're both smiling. But no, he said, I was scared every moment. He said, I was glad to get away from the guy. And Henry was a mob groupie. That I'll tell you, that's how it all started with Henry. He lived across the street from Paul Vario. It
Yeah.
all started that way. You know, it was like a kid lives across the street from the drug dealer. He sees all the nice car, the nice clothes, the girls. Well, that's what Henry saw. And that's what he wanted to do. Yeah. Paul Vario was a mean guy, very mean guy. He was give a woman a crack in the face. Yeah. Yeah, he was mean. That's what Jimmy Burke reported to. Another character. But yeah.
Well, because that's, I mean, how, because I mean, effectively, I mean, even in Goodfellas, he at the beginning they actually talk about the fact he basically just saw a lifestyle and fell in love with it, and you
Yeah.
know he doesn't even he doesn't shy away from saying that. But in whether the film is correct or not, it does portray him as somebody that he likes the lifestyle, but he's not a natural born killer compared to some of them. Yeah, he'll kill out of
Well,
necessity, but not out of.
that's
So you write, in very early in the book, you talk about when you see, I think the chap's name was Wally, where he kicks a pregnant woman, just and
yeah, and I had to water that down.
yeah. But you made a very interesting point, and and I want to kind of reference this is that it didn't really matter whether the husband was there or not. It didn't really matter whether she'd have given the husband up or not. He had an intention to hurt somebody, and she was there, so she was getting it. And what she didn't know or would never know, there was no way she was getting out of that. She could have done. She could have given him the money. He'd have found a reason to smack her. That was his.
Oh yeah, it was yeah.
It's just their makeup. That's what gives. And you point that out that when you got into the car, you realised he just enjoyed hurting people.
Yeah, there were a lot of guys like that. Is once they get into the rage, see, it's all about a rage. They get into the rage, and they knew they had to come back with the money because the next order could be them. And in
Yeah,
that case, the reason I had to water it down, she was pregnant.
yeah.
Okay, and it wasn't just giving her a crack in the face. Okay, he's
Well, you're
kicking
right
her
because you write in the book he kicks her in the stomach despite the fact she's pregnant.
quite a bit. Yeah, and the blood is pouring out of her mouth, like when you see an oil well in the blood. That's
Yeah,
how it's pouring out on her. So yeah, he didn't stop. And I didn't know if she was gonna, if the fetus was gonna make it, the baby. I didn't know what was, but I had to water it down because people would get very nauseous. You know, some people act tough, but you put something in front of them like that, or what I saw dogs, what happened to dogs. I had to leave that out completely. I never put that in the book. What I saw, what happened to dogs that were owned by guys who owed money. What happened to them? And what I mean, what happened to them was if they saw the dog in the backyard. Oftentimes, you know, people have their dog in the backyard.
mm.
They come back with meat and poison it, all different types of poison, rat poisoning, anything they could put in and throw it over the fence and watch the dog eat it. Okay. And if the dog didn't pass down right away, one guy had a tranquilizer gun and he'd shoot the dog with the tranquilizer gun. Okay. So then the dog now is passed out. It's eating this meat that's poison. It's going to die. And guy would go in with an axe, small handled axe, and start chopping the dog's head off, all the body parts of the dog. Yeah, could people handle that who are pet owners? I
No,
knew
yeah,
so many people are pet owners. No, they're not going to be able to handle that. So, like the pregnant woman, which I watered down, like the dogs, I didn't put anything in about dogs because I know people are pet owners. It would be very, very upsetting. It was hard for me. And I never had a pet, to see that. It's enough, you're killing the dog, but to go in and mutilate the dog, cut his hands off, cut his paws off, just keep hacking away at him. And that's what it is with guys. See, once they get into a rage, until the rage goes over, they don't care. Okay. So I put it on automatic. You're told to do this and you do it. And it's going to be done. And nothing's going to stop them. Okay. Nothing's going to stop them. And my father would always say, that's why they're never consider them a friend, because they're not going to be a friend, because if they're told to do something to you. See, besides the killings, there was two other things. To get beaten, it was either, rough them up or beat them. Now, roughing someone's up meant that maybe you give him a crack in the face, you grab his throat and push him against the wall. Maybe you give him a punch in the stomach. But that would be about it. To beat a guy, and they'd ask my father, how do you want him? Do you want him beat or roughed up? My father says, in this case, beat him. And beat him meant was they would take like a blackjack, a small blackjack with that like a grip on it, and start beating the guy, breaking his nose, breaking his jaw, breaking his face, say the cheekbones on both sides, not only breaking them but shattering them. Okay,
Yeah.
knocking the guy down, then taking his head and start pounding it into the ground, and then start kicking him. And they'd always say to me, "How many ribs should I kick out? How many should I break?" And keep kicking them until they maybe didn't break all the guy's ribs, but enough that the guy would have to go to the hospital. But he was severely beaten. So yeah, like I say, once they got going, that was it.
Well, you mentioned that. What is it? Films. Let's do both sides of it. What do films get right, and what do they get wrong?
Well, they get right in the sense that they're calling it the mob. That they get right. I'll give them that. What they get wrong is, and they do an excellent job of entertainment. This is the whole thing. It's always about entertainment. Okay, and they portray things. You have to remember that the people say, like Martin Scorsese, who does an excellent job, of course, they don't know what the life is really like. Okay, they got a technical advisor, but the technical advisor, sometimes they color things a bit, but the director, the producer, they have no idea. So they think, okay, this is the way it really is. And they try and portray something through their lenses, through what they're seeing. And it's not like that at all. I mean, if I talk to Robert De Niro, his face would, I could just see it now. His eyes would get real big. And really what Jimmy Burke was like. Really what Jimmy Burke was like. Okay. And wasn't that. The real Tommy DeSimone, was very, very psychotic, extremely psychotic. He was a guy we first met. At that time, when I was working, at Henry Hill's place, the Suite in New York, drinking age was 18. Now, the federal government would later change that. Every state became 21, but New York was 18. And I was about 20, and Tommy was about 20. And I had heard that he killed somebody. And I said, Tommy, what happened with this gentleman? He was walking down the street in front of you. Howard Goldstein was his name. He said, yeah. He said, he walked down Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn. Then he took a right, went down a side street. And I put, I used my gun and put 3 in the hat and 2 in the chest. And I said, well, was he mobbed up? Was he involved with the mob anyway? Did he owe money? He says, no. He says, I got a new gun and I had to try it out. That was his answer to me. I got a new gun and I had to try it out. Tommy was the type of guy, if you played cards with him and he lost, he was throwing cards at you. If you were playing darts with him, lost, he'd throw darts at you. And the one thing that got Tommy into trouble, my father would always say, guys like Tommy aren't going to make it past 30. And he got killed at 28. Was he killed 2 Maid Gambino guys. And one of the guys he killed, a lot of people don't know this, he started out with John Gotti when they both began in mob life, Carmen Fatico, Street Crew, okay? And Gotti was very close with Billy Batts, very close. And Paul Vario gave him up. He gave him up because he wanted John Gotti had a warehouse at that time. And it was all about what was going to happen after the Lufthansa deal, where they stole the money out from Lufthansa, the 6.4 million. And so he gave him up to John Gotti. Other people say it was other people, but no, it wasn't. I mean, the scene in the movie where I had to go back and look at these movies. I never used to watch them. But now, after my book come out, people ask me questions. I had to see the movie. And that was true. That was a true part where the guys from the Casey crime family walked out of the room and left Tommy alone, and John Gotti put 3 in the hat. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, they don't know the real people. Okay. They don't know the real people. They don't really know how Jimmy Burke.
And would somebody like Tommy and Jimmy Burke be difficult to be around?
Yeah, he would be. He would be, depending on what Paul Vario wanted him to do. Okay, that became the issue. Is what does your copper Jimmy tell you that he wants done? And you got to remember, Jimmy Burke was a cokehead. He was into coke very heavily. Him, Henry Hill, Angelo Sepi, and Tommy DeSimone. I always see him in the back. And they were always, they'd offer it to me. He said, Scott, you want a line? I says, no, it itches my nose. It was a lie. I never used drugs. but I
Mm.
had to come up with something. I said, no, it itches my nose, and I start sneezing. And one sneeze with cocaine, it's just on the table, you'll blow it away. So no, Jimmy Burke was, they call him Gentleman Jimmy.
Yeah,
He
but
would do some things.
how would someone like you navigate being around them so that you didn't get in the crossfire of just
Well,
being angry?
I would know what to say and how to talk to him. For example, Tommy DeSimone, and he's telling me after all this other stuff, he's saying, I got uncles in the mob, and he had family that was in the Gambino family. He was with Lucchese crime family, but he had a couple of brothers. And he said, I got a couple of uncles that are in the mob in California. And I said, Los Angeles? And he said, yeah. I said, Los Angeles reports to Chicago. They were one of some of the crime families, like Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Des Moines, St. Louis, Omaha, Nebraska. They all reported to the outfit. My father expanded when Tony Accardo took over. And Tommy says, yeah, I got two uncles. What about it? And I says, well, I probably know your uncles, or they know my father. And he says, okay. And I said, why don't you call him? He says, yeah. So 2 days later, I'm back working, depending on my school schedule. That dictated when I would work, of course. And he comes up to me right away and says, yeah, I talked to one of my uncles. I told him I'm working with this kid whose father's high ranking in the outfit. He said to me, Tommy, whatever the kid wants, you do. Okay? Don't start with the outfit. Don't ever start with the outfit. And he was, from that point on, he was always nice to me. Always nice to me. And I would always keep a vanilla when we talk conversation, how he was a Mets fan, this, that.
Yeah.
And in the life, everything was done first class. So the hot clubs in New York at the time was the Copacabana, and Latin King was big, which was owned by Barbara Walters' father. That's a whole nother story about him. And, everything was done first class. And I'd say, oh, Tommy, did you get tickets to go see, say, Frank Sinatra if he was playing there? Oh, yeah. Because say you wanted to see Frank Sinatra, say you wanted to see some top performer, Tony Bennett, but you said, I can't get tickets. Well, a phone call would be made to someone, and all of a sudden you're getting tickets for the third row, and all of a sudden you're taken backstage to take pictures and talk with Tony Bennett and everything. So, yeah, but Tommy was different once he found out, because he was told by his uncles. One of his uncles says, listen, the outfit can put more guns on the street than the Lucchese crime family. That was the truth.
Yeah.
Okay, because we had these other cities reporting. So from that point on, Tommy wasn't psychotic anymore. Okay, he wasn't going to be psychotic. So I got along with him. The same thing. When they knew my father was high ranking in the outfit, it was a whole different story, because they're asking me all about Las Vegas, because the outfit runs Las Vegas, which was true. We ran Las Vegas. Las Vegas and Florida was open. Any crime family could operate in Nevada, or they could operate in Florida. And Las
How
Vegas
do you
was
think?
the opposite.
How do you think your dad managed to stay alive?
Well, how he did it was because he worked, like I say, in the areas, because of the money he's bringing in. Okay, the money he's bringing in, not only Las Vegas, he had other plans. He had a good drug plan, very good drug plan. Because when I met with 22 retired FBI agents and their spouses, I said, one of the spouses, she was a book club member, and she heard about the book, and a friend got her the book, and she said, my husband's a retired agent. She called me, and I said, well, what's his name? And sure, he was one of the agents that was working OC cases, organized crime cases, and later became known as La Cosa Nostra cases that came later on. And I met with them and with their wives. I said, if they sign my book, I'll come. If not, I leave. So I went to the restaurant, and they paid for my meal, and they signed the book. And I told them about my father's drug plan, which was not implemented. And there was another reason for that. And they said, no, we never would have figured it out. And the drug plan was the mules, the carriers, were going to be all women, and they were going to be dressed up in business suits, and they'd be given locked briefcases. They wouldn't know what they had, and they'd have to deliver. And like I said to them, I said, would you have known it was a woman who's carrying heroin? They'd say, no, we'd be looking for a guy, because mob life is macho. It's macho.
Yeah.
It's macho. And one time I asked my father, I said, Dad, could a woman ever run the outfit, a day-to-day operation? I figured, I'm joking. I figured he's going to say, Scott, are you kidding? Come on. It's a man's world. He says to me, Scotto, in prison, there's women in prison, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, there's women that have shot and killed their husbands, their boyfriends, their lovers, their uncles, right? And I said, yeah. So that means if they can pull the trigger, they can give the order on somebody, right? And I said,
Okay.
yeah. He said, the only thing is you got to find that woman. That's the problem. But he never felt that a woman couldn't run day to day as long as they could pull the trigger. If they're in prison for shooting somebody, yeah, they can pull the trigger. As much as they might have remorse, that wouldn't mean anything because once you pull the trigger, you lose any fear. That was it.
What do you think your dad did though that was different? Because he gave orders, received orders. He always seemed to navigate the situation one step, if not three steps ahead, but without making enemies.
Well, there were enemies, sure. There were people that didn't like him,
Yeah, but there
obviously.
were
But
enemies, and then there's real enemies.
yeah, that's correct. And what it was my father knew right away, right from Jump Street, what type of personalities he was dealing with, what he could say, what he couldn't say. And like I say, I go back to the mob statement, the mob like law of if it's your business and not my business, it's none of my business. And
Yeah,
he knew exactly what to say, when to say it, just to listen or be supportive. You'd be supportive when I know how the Kennedys and the outfit started. That's a long, long, long story. But when Sam Giancana told him about Calneva, it all was all about Calneva, the casino on South Lake Tahoe on Nevada, California border in the mountains there. And he told Sam Giancana, oh, that's great. I said, Sam, if that's what you want, that's great. You're the boss. You make the decision. You'd always make it with people. You're the boss. You're in charge. You tell me what you want me to do, and I'll carry it out for you. So he never rubbed anybody the wrong way. Okay? He never did. And that was the difference. See, a lot of guys would make mistakes because their egos got real big, because they're able to manipulate people because of money, because of fear. And that became very, very big. Okay. Became very, very big for these guys. Because if you can manipulate someone, you got them. They're yours. Okay. And that was the thing. He knew how to navigate the people. I knew how far he could go in what he was saying and when he had to be supportive. When he would say, that's a good idea. I didn't think about that. I'm glad you told me. Yeah, I'm going to check it out. Because he would always tell me, with wise guys, you always got to check them out. Because 90% of the time is lies and 10% is BS. And then he would say to me, Scott, remember this. If your mother says she loves you, check her out. And I said, even if mom says she loves, don't even accept her love unless you check it out to make sure. And that's how he was able to do it. My father didn't have a big ego. That was the deal. That was the reason. He knew what to say, when to say it, how to say it, what voice inflection. Yeah. So that was it.
just want to, for my last sort of question, because I know both of us need to kind of move on. One of the things that is always on the fringe of all of these films is the Jewish mobsters. So you hear about the Italians, you hear about the Irish, and how interlinked they are. But the Jewish always seem to be on the very edge. But from what I can figure out and from what I can gather, the Jewish mob was just as big, just had the same sort of powers, were just as nasty. But they somehow seem to have stayed silent and under the radar of all of the books and all of the films. And it's almost like the Italian mob want everybody to know, and the Jewish are like, well, we'd rather nobody knew who we were.
Well, with the Jewish mob, which of course goes back to the 20s, Murder Incorporated in New York, was run by Jews, and all the shooters were Italian. Okay, and some of them became Joe Bonanno, Joe Colombo. A lot of them ran families. But there's an old saying, of course, and as generations came up, the younger Jewish guys, nobody went. They went to college. Just like I'm asked, and I'll tell you real quick. They'll say, "What happened to the Irish gangs of the 1920s?" Okay, I'll hear that a lot. And I'd always say, well, they became cops, prosecutors, and judges. That's what happened to them. But the thing was, there was always a saying that Jews kill for each other, Italians kill each other. And
Yeah.
that was really what it was about. See, because the Jewish mobsters, and they were just as bad, like you say, but they looked at things on a business sense. Okay, how do we run it as a business? How do we make money as a business? Because if you're not bringing in the money, it's like a guy who has a store. If no, he doesn't have the customers, doesn't have the business, he's out of business. So that's why they'd be involved that way. And that's why with the outfit, there was so many businesses, so many ways of bringing in money. I mean, it was the unions you were getting 10% on. Anyone who had a state or city or county contract, construction company, demolition, insurance, they were getting, 10% of those contracts. So much things were happening. So much things. I always remember uh, it's near the Jewish holiday, most holiest day is called Yom Kippur. And vending machines were big business, okay, as were jukeboxes and were pinball machines. And we go to the northeast side of Chicago, and the guy's name was Jack Crandell, and he was a gambler, but he had a vending machine business, and I was collecting. So I'm with Lawrence Newman, whose father was a Quaker and his mother was Jewish, okay? And Tony Spilaccio never liked to be alone with him because he liked to kill. He'd come in, see Tony, and say, Tony, got anybody today? Got anybody today? So he tells Newman to collect the money from Crandell. Go see him. So we go near, the sun is starting to set, and after sundown is when the Jewish holiday would begin. And so Crandell says, Larry, it's almost Yom Kippur. I mean, can I talk with you like the next day after? This is a one-day holiday. You have to fast and all that. So then so Larry Newman looks at him. I'll never forget this. He looks at him, pulls out his 32. Okay, he had a shoulder holster, but he had a 32 in the shoulder holster. And he points at Jack Crandell's head, who was Jewish. He said, Jack, I'm only half Jewish. And Crandell ran in the house and got that money as fast as he could get it. So we're in the car, and I says, would you have hit him? He said, absolutely. He said, it wasn't Yom Kippur yet. It wasn't Yom Kippur. So he said, I could still whack him at that point. Yeah, funny things. That was interesting.
It is funny because they have a mindset that people just don't understand, and unless you witness it firsthand, you can never really comprehend just how it's no different to them to pouring a cup of coffee and pulling a trigger. It's
like how I said with Frank Calabrese. Frank Calabrese was the type of guy. It was like the movie Sybil. He had like 14 different personalities. He could sit here with you, David, and be very nice to you and say, Davis, this was a great interview. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on your show. And say it was an in-studio appearance, not a podcast. And he'd say, David, I'll be right back. I know you got a couple minutes. I'll come right back. And you would think he's maybe going to the bathroom, right? He'd come back with a 38 and blow your brains out and then still tell you a dirty joke or something and smile at you. Okay? So this is how it would be. Guys would turn on that quick, say things and do things that fast. That's how it would be happening. And to them, everything was normal. And as a child, things became normal to me. Seeing my first murder, when I was 11 years old, I saw a guy's hands cut off. He was still alive. The same guy, when I was 12, used an axe, bigger axe, and he took a guy's head off. He decapitated him when I was 12. And sure, it was all scary. Like I tell people, I always have emotional scars, never go away. But after a while, seeing all the beatings I saw from juice collectors, street enforcers, you become kind of numb. You become cold about it. It becomes just normal, just a normal thing.
Yeah, that's probably the best place to stop. I'd definitely love to do some more again if it's possible. Because there's just so much.
I would get into Marilyn Monroe with you.
Well, we haven't even got into juice collecting yet. We haven't got into the rackets, the juice collecting, the celebrities, the Marilyn.
You never had gotten into Marilyn Monroe yet, who I met. Yeah, that's a whole other story.
This is what I mean. All of these things. It's endless. We haven't got into the JFK.
Well, that's why hosts always want to spend more time. I had a host one time, David. I know you got to go. And he said to me, Mr. Hoffman, if I could cancel the next show, I would do it. And we just keep talking. That's what hosts tell me. I wish I could just keep talking. And I've been to restaurants. One time, the restaurant was supposed to close at 9:00, and I had like 70 people there in like a banquet room in the restaurant. And the owner comes in, he says, okay, if anyone wants to leave, I'm going to just close the door and I'll put the close sign on. And I thought we were all through at 9:00. He says, because I'm going to ask Mr. Hoffman to keep on going. And he says, is there anybody? Just raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. Everybody stayed. He kept me talking there in the restaurant. It was closed. There was no more customers coming in. The cooks went home. I was there till about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay. That's how long I was there. Just keep talking, he'd say, just keep
Yeah.
talking. And that's what people tell me, just keep talking, keep talking. So
Well,
yeah, it's a subject.
well, I would definitely like to be able to do this again if that's going to be a possibility. And there you have it, an inside story from Scott. Please check out the links in the bio. Thank you very much for listening. I am currently, as I'm recording this, editing, etc., seeing if I can arrange a second interview at some point, as I'd definitely love to have Scott on again, because it's just such a large depth field of questions, and there's so many things going on. So hopefully that will happen. And lastly, and not least, as always, thank you for your support. And wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you believe, be blessed and take care of yourself.